This is the REDMAGIC 10 Pro, a recently released gaming smartphone with a display and hardware that can compete with the highest-end flagships out there, except it only starts at $650 US. Seriously, the specs are pretty wild for that price point. We're looking at a Snapdragon 8 Elite processor, at least 12 gigs of RAM, a 144Hz high-resolution AMOLED seamless display with no notch or cutout in sight, a ridiculous 7050 mAh battery that seemingly lasts forever, and a couple 50-megapixel camera sensors on the back with, crucially, zero camera bump in sight. Heck, there's even a headphone jack. This is a thick phone to be sure, but it has the hardware and power to more than make up for it. And on paper, it's crazy good value. So today, we're going to discuss whether or not it can live up to its spec sheet and even be worth buying. Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and I specifically have here the REDMAGIC 10 Pro in the all-new Lightspeed color, which is just now officially releasing. This phone was sent to me by the REDMAGIC team, and I'll have a link in the description to it if you'd like to see it for yourself, but to be clear, this video is not sponsored and I do not make any commissions on sales. I'm just purely looking at the phone for the fun of it. As soon as I saw that display, I really knew I wanted to give this thing a proper review. I mean, just look at this thing, it's gorgeous, but let's not get too ahead of ourselves here. We'll start with the unboxing and initial impressions, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of whether or not the 10 Pro could be a good buy, and if it can potentially even surpass the bounds of the niche mobile gaming market. First thing we get is this simple gray box with the logo, and the box itself is quite large, which is a good thing. This indicates we'll actually be getting a charger inside, much to the horror of Tim Cook. On the side here, we can see the specs for the model they've sent me. We've got 12 gigs of RAM and 256 gigs of storage, but you can spec these things up to a terabyte of storage and 24 gigs of RAM for up to $1,000 if you so choose. Probably not necessary. This phone's going to be plenty powerful enough already, but it's nice to have the option. As we open this thing up, we've got the paperwork on the top, and taking that off, we see the phone in all its Lightspeed glory. I gotta say, this new color, it's pretty gorgeous, this very bright white. We do have that basic paperwork, a SIM tool, a thin plastic case, and we can pull out the phone itself, which is immediately very chunky, like impressively thick and bulky, which makes sense given the hardware and robust cooling system. There's even vents on the side of the phone. Going further into the box, we have an 80-watt USB-C power brick, which is a really nice addition. This phone charges crazy fast. We've also got a USB-C cable, as you would expect. But turning to the phone, we can peel off this plastic to get to the real deal, and man, that is a very striking glass backplate, very bright. We've got the REDMAGIC brand logo in the bottom corner, and then on the top corner we have what at first glance, I'm not gonna lie, really looks like the X logo, the Twitter logo. Now it's actually the logo for the 10 Pro, I guess X for 10, that sounds vaguely familiar for some reason, but I definitely think a passive observer would think this is the X logo. So I'm not so sure how I feel about that little design element, but it's really not a big deal, and overall this is a very clean look. You'd also probably initially think there's 3 camera lenses, and there technically are, but this third big one with the red dot is actually a window for the fan. And yes, there is RGB, because I mean, how could we have a gaming phone without RGB? They've actually spent a lot of time on the cooling system for this phone. We've got the ICE-X cooling system, which entails liquid metal cooling technology apparently. Seems overkill to me, but I can appreciate pushing the limits of what you can do with a smartphone. Beside the camera, you've got the flash and then a tiny little 2-megapixel macro camera, which why? But okay, we'll look at photography in a bit, so let's actually turn this thing on. We get a straightforward setup process. In the past with Chinese smartphones, including some I've reviewed from REDMAGIC, the localized text translations can be a bit rough, and unfortunately that does still seem to be the case in some areas of the software like settings, but it wasn't too difficult for me to understand usually. But moving through this, we get a few options for security, facial recognition, and then an under-display fingerprint sensor, which is pretty quick. One funny little thing was it gave me some recommended app options, including Mahjong for seniors. I think I'm saying that right, but yeah, probably not a great app for the target audience of this device. I would say just drop this whole recommended apps thing, but it's not an uncommon quirk of Android to have something like this. I found it mainly just a bit amusing. But from here, we get into the phone itself, with this beautiful white butterfly wallpaper perfectly complementing the phone's design. And man, that display is just gorgeous. And there's a thin plastic screen protector coming pre-installed. The chin is ever so slightly larger than the top bezel, but it's still really, really sleek, and the lack of any cutout for the front-facing camera makes this whole thing feel so seamless. It's absolutely eye-catching, but where is the front-facing camera, you might be wondering? Well, it's under the display, completely invisible in normal conditions. You can, however, see it when it's in use, and there's a second where it's still visible as you go back to the home screen. I haven't used too many phones with this invisible front-facing camera personally, but of the ones I have tried out, this one's pretty dang good. The only real downside is the same as all of these under-display cameras. The quality of the photos is not great, it's pretty rough. It is 16 megapixels, but yeah, pretty mediocre quality. I think it's safe to say most gamers don't really care too much about the quality of their selfies, so I would say this is a worthwhile compromise for most buyers of this device. It's gotta be worth it for this pure, clean, gorgeous 6.85-inch AMOLED 144Hz display, rocking a resolution of 1216 by 2688 and pixel density of 431 pixels per inch. And there's a good reason for having this screen. If you're going to be gaming a lot on your phone, you really don't need a big hole punch notch or dynamic island intruding into your gameplay. Quite frankly, the screen here is the most impressive thing about this phone. It's gorgeous, and it gets really bright up to 2000 nits. Indoors, it can be almost blinding. I kept having to lower the brightness, and that's a good thing. This is, after all, first and foremost, a gaming phone targeted towards the mobile gamer. Now, this is a niche I am certainly not a part of myself, but what I do like a lot is the benefits that can come from having gaming level hardware at a reasonable price tag. This is the type of phone someone who wants a lot of power at the best possible value might get. And with the Snapdragon 8 Elite chipset, 12, 16, or 24 gigs of RAM, up to a terabyte in storage, and that crazy high refresh rate display, it's really hard to argue with, especially when you're looking at only $650 to start. This thing flies no matter what you throw at it, and looks buttery smooth doing it to boot. I just wish more games actually supported 144 Hz. It's kinda crazy how few do. Even Fortnite only goes up to 90 frames per second, at least as far as I could tell. Now, of course, this is not the most compact device. It's huge and thick and heavy, but it also has no camera bump, which is kind of amazing to see in 2025, honestly. On the bottom of the device, we have the USB-C port and SIM tray, plus one of the dual firing speakers, with the other speaker on the top, along with a headphone jack if you remember those old things. Truly a miracle. I kinda joke, but it is nice to have a headphone jack on a phone dedicated for gaming. On both sides of the phone, we've got the antenna bands and the vents for cooling, and then on this side, there's a lot going on with the volume rocker, circular power button, a red slider to turn on gaming mode, and then touch bumpers, which could be handy for some extra input options while gaming. Flicking the slider, we instantly enter gaming mode, which is where we begin to really see that side of this phone. And while I'm not going to spend too much time on that part of the REDMAGIC 10 Pro, as again, it's not really for me personally, it's worth at least a brief look along with the overall software experience. After all, it's one of the main gimmicks. After the animation for the epic gamer mode, as I like to call it, we arrive to our game lobby where we can boot up games, and the RGB on the back starts going crazy. We can also turn on the fan, which makes a car revving sound. Yes, really, and we can do this from a widget on the home screen as well. It also does this when you plug in the phone. Definitely quirky. If we go to the super base, we've got this little hub including, yeah, an anime girl built into the phone, because of course. Look, I get maybe I'm not the demographic for this sort of feature, and I'm not gonna judge anyone who might enjoy this, but it's not for me. Sorry, Mora, don't think I'll be adding you to my home screen anytime soon. But hey, if you want a waifu built into your phone, well, you've got one here with the REDMAGIC 10 Pro. As for what else we've got pre-installed, on the far left, there's this search area with some weirdly clickbaity widgets that we can thankfully turn off. Seriously, the news widget had articles that look straight out of clickbait ads from any sketchy website you might be on. Really not a fan of all this, to be honest. Like, this should not be pre-installed. If we go through our apps, we do have a little bit of bloat. Some is expected, like Facebook and TikTok already installed, and then you've got some apps like WPS Office, Mobo Reader, and Mobo Reels. I've never even heard of these. Hot Games, Hot Apps, again, really don't like these being included, but whatever. Booking.com, okay, sure. There's GoPer, which is an app for REDMAGIC's accessories and peripherals if you purchase any of those. Overall, this is fairly standard stuff here, and thankfully, even with a little bit of bloat, the actual software experience is pretty clean and mostly stock, aside from all that classic gamer stuff built in. And things like the news widget, you can replace yourself with whatever you want. With Chinese smartphones like this, the software experience can be a bit hit or miss, but I think REDMAGIC's done a decent job overall. And yeah, with Android, there's so many options for customizability and freedom to really tailor the phone to your individual taste. Unfortunately, as far as I can tell, the bootloader on these things typically isn't unlockable, which I think is a real shame. Custom ROM support would add a lot of potential longevity to these devices. But anyways, we do again come back to the fact that this is in fact a gaming phone at its core, and it's specifically built to embrace that experience. We also do get somewhat regular updates with a guaranteed at least one full Android update. Right now we're on Android 15, so eventually we'll get Android 16 once that's all out. And we're also specifically running REDMAGIC's own customized OS, and we're guaranteed 2 upgrades of that. We do have a bunch of Gemini AI features if that's something you're interested in, and lots of options for mapping inputs for gaming, which I think is crucial with a phone like this for power users. The triggers on the side alone makes this phone far more useful for gaming than any typical flagship, although I still don't think you can beat a physical controller. One nice thing, whether you game or don't, the battery life here is insane. This thing lasts forever, no matter the task, and it charges really fast with the included adapter. It also fires up the fans when plugged in, which helps it not get excessively warm like a lot of phones would when fast charging. This battery life is probably the best I've ever experienced in any smartphone. Just personally speaking, I don't think I've used a phone with a bigger battery than this. Now, of course, there's downsides here because it's bulky, and the phone itself is maybe not the most comfortable thing in the world for me to use, but I also don't exactly have large hands. It does feel very substantial, but in a good way, and the build here is just really premium. The display and hardware is really solid, even great, and far beyond what you would normally get at a mid-range price point. The software though, look, if you're into mobile gaming, there's a lot of options. If you're not, it does feel a bit lackluster and not really up to the level of some competing devices like a Pixel or a Galaxy, although that's maybe setting the bar too high. But again, this is a gaming phone, and that's the market this is geared for. We'll put a pin in that for now though, and take a quick look at the cameras before starting to wrap this up. As mentioned before, the selfie camera leaves a lot to be desired, but I do not care considering it's invisible under the display and allows for that gorgeous screen. Turning to the rear cameras, the numbers look pretty good on paper. A 50 megapixel wide and 50 megapixel ultra wide lens, along with technically a 2 megapixel macro lens, which I guess sure, why not? It makes sense that the cameras wouldn't be the central focus of this phone. When you're giving this level of hardware at $650, you do need to cut corners somewhere. That's not to say these are awful, they're fine, but by no means impressive for 2025. It is still a modern smartphone, which means you can easily get nice looking photos, but they're not going to blow you away, feeling like a sort of generic Android camera that you would see on dozens of smartphones every year. They also start with this watermark, which I've never liked from certain Chinese smartphones, but you can turn that off, so it's not a big deal. It's there. It shows you the ISO info, so I figured I'd keep it on for the examples in this video. The ultra-wide lens also feels really lackluster compared to the other options on the market. It's worse than the main lens. It's not that good, but I mean, again, what do you expect? We can take 8K video, albeit I don't know why you would want to, and that's all fine, I guess, but probably stick with the typical 4K for more reasonable results and quality. This is a mediocre camera at best, but a usable one in my eyes. Kind of the right fit for somebody looking for a gaming phone and doesn't need to take too many pictures, but still might want to snap some on occasion. You can definitely get a phone with a better camera for $650 or cheaper. I mean, even just like a Pixel 8a or something, but you can't have everything. You have to compromise somewhere, and with this phone, it's going to be in the cameras in order to boast the big display and big power. That Snapdragon 8 Elite chip is still very new, and to have it here is an amazing addition. So let's start to wrap this up. Is the REDMAGIC 10 Pro worth it? Well, yes and no. It's tough because it all boils down to the type of user you are and what you do with your phone. If you're either a power user looking for the best possible value for hardware or are really into mobile gaming, this is sort of an obvious buy. You're not going to find these sorts of specs and performance for $650 anywhere else, along with that beautiful screen. The hardware is incredibly impressive. But if you're an average, more typical user, the honest answer is no, this phone is not worth buying. You're looking at cameras that at absolute best are very mediocre, only a single major Android OS update, software that's tailored to gaming and is pretty middling everywhere else, and a chunky build that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense for most people. This is a niche phone for a niche market, and there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't make it bad. I actually think this is in a lot of ways a very fantastic device for gamers. It's just got too many compromises for your average smartphone user who maybe does some light gaming at most, like myself. There's also some basic features missing. There's no eSIM support, no water resistance, stuff like that. This is a great, amazing gaming phone, possibly one of the best ever made and on the market at the moment, but it's not well-rounded enough to be a great smartphone for most people, and I really don't see any way for REDMAGIC to change that for the price point presented. So again, don't take this as a knock against them per se. Now there is some stuff I really don't like here. I mean, okay, the gaming software stuff is all fine if a little cheesy at times, the built-in waifu ain't my thing, but sure. But some of the pre-included bloat, app recommendations, really weirdly clickbaity news on the home screen, awkward English translations, I think the software could use at least a minor overhaul and maybe a few native English speakers on the team to help polish things out. This is a very common quirk of Chinese smartphones, to be clear, but it's one that I feel like could be solved with a bit of effort. Even with all that, there's no denying the value on the table here and just how beautiful this smartphone is in all its light speed glory with that crazy 144Hz display. If you want a gaming phone, you're not getting much better than this in 2025. And I think with that, we'll end things here today. Huge thanks to REDMAGIC for shipping this phone out to me. And again, I've got a link in the description to their website if you want to take a look. Not sponsored, I make zero money if you buy it, but I did have a lot of fun reviewing this crazy smartphone. This really is sort of a phone from the future. No notch, no interruptions, the seamless display, and no camera bump on the back. It's a really nice change of pace. But what do you think of it? Make sure you leave a comment down below. If you found this video helpful or interesting, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more tech content. Huge shout out to the channel members. Thank you guys so much for your support, and thank you all so much for watching. Without further ado, I am Josh from 91 Tech, and I will see you all next time.